380. Secularism. Chalcedon Report number 219, October 1983. Discussions of secularism are complicated by the fact that the word has two major meanings. First, secular means lay as opposed to the clergy. Secular humanism is the religious practice of humanism by laymen. The application of humanism by schoolteachers, legislators, and judges is secular humanism. Its application in churches by the clergy is clerical humanism. Our conflict in the courts and in the world at large is with secular humanism. It is the religious force present in newspapers, television, the world of labour and capital, the arts and sciences, and elsewhere as well. Secular humanism is a major and powerful force on every continent and in virtually every nation in the world. But second, secular means of the world, profane, and not sacred or religious. Secularism, in this sense, is a matter of recent history, although it has deep roots. Only in the modern era has this kind of secularism commanded society. In earlier eras, all things were seen as religious by biblical and non-biblical faiths. The sacred governs the totality of life, and to regard any area of life as secular was profane and evil. St. Paul is clear on this point. Whatsoever is not of faith is sin. Romans chapter 14, verse 23. In this sense, to make anything secular is to diminish our view of God and to sin. Since God created all things, governs all things, and sustains all things, to regard anything or any area of life as outside his law, word, and government is to be guilty of profanity and to sin. God's rule is total, and to declare anything or any area of life and thought secular means that men claim that area as one reserved to human sovereignty and law. The roots of secularism in this sense go back to Neoplatonism at least. Elements of this entered into the church and coloured the monastic movement. Successive reforms within the monastic movement placed the monks into the context of the world, however. Late medieval reform movements and mysticism stressed a withdrawal from the world as secular, as did some major strands of Anabaptism. However, it was only after 1660 and with the rise of Pietism that this movement into secularism began to command Christendom, Catholic and Protestant. The Pietists began to withdraw from politics, economics, the arts and sciences, education, intellectual pursuits, even rejecting an emphasis on doctrine as quote-unquote arid intellectualism and to stress pious gush and quote spiritual exercises end quote as the essence as well as the fullness of the faith. All concerns over political order, social problems and intellectual pursuits were seen as worldly. All were declared secular by deliberate choice. God was limited to the narrow world of inner experience. As a result, antinomianism triumphed. In the first half of the 18th century, the pastor of the French church at The Hague, Jacques or James Saurin, preached powerfully against this trend. By 1800, however, the Pietists had so triumphed that Saurin's name in religious encyclopedias is still blackened by their hostility, and one of the great theologians of the pulpit goes neglected. The doctrine of sin was thus radically altered. William Wilberforce, in A Practical View of the Prevailing Religious System of Professed Christians, contrasted with Real Christianity, 1797, wrote, "Sin is considered in Scripture as rebellion against the sovereignty of God, and every different act of it equally violates his law, and, if persevered in, disclaims his supremacy." Page 223. Sin now came to be defined in terms of pietistic spirituality, not the Lord and His Word. Secularism, in this second sense, limits the realm of God and of the sacred. It surrenders most of the world and life to the devil and reserves only a small corner for God. This kind of secularism began in the Church and still prevails in much of the Church. The Church found the world happy to receive this release from the government of God. The devotees of this perversion of the faith actually warn Christians against, quote, worldliness, end quote, that is, involvement in politics, art, intellectual and scientific disciplines, and so on. One natural consequence of this is antinomianism. God's law requires us to act in relationship to the world in terms of God's holy purposes. The law is thus discarded as a lesser and worldly matter. A second consequence is a disregard for the Old Testament and a misreading of the New. The prophets are read in abstraction from the controversy with the state or civil government of their day, and in abstraction from the false concepts of economics and justice which the prophets attacked. To be profane is literally to be outside the temple, or outside the faith. Secularism, in this second sense, places most of the world outside of God's province. We must add, however, that nothing can be, nor is, more secular or more profane than a church or churchmen who places most of the world outside of Christian faith and concern, and outside the government of God and His world. This is the ultimate profanity, and it is all too common.